So I've never understood why people make such a big deal out of John Deere's until I owned one. And this baby here is a classic. I get a lot of people coming to my property and asking if I've got a 3010, which is what I've got. This thing's a 1960s era tractor, still going strong. Original engine, all the gears work. It's a bit noisy, gotta wear earplugs or earmuffs. But I was just getting ready to put this bad boy away, and I'm thinking about all the work that we've done the last little while because of it. Our garden is in, or at least one of them anyways. We're gonna put another garden in, and I think I've mentioned that we've got a greenhouse. I'm just gonna sit over here, put the tractor in the background while we talk a little bit about farms and farm design and some of my insights in the first few weeks. I think they're interesting because moving from an urban to a rural context is a big deal. It's a much larger piece of property, and so you end up needing to find force multipliers, and so one of them ends up being equipment, whether that's a tractor or a rototiller, side by side. I've started adding up all the engines that I ended up acquiring with this property, and I've got a John Deere lawn tractor, I've got a Toro zero-turn mower, I've got a side-by-side, it's 3, I've got a generator, I've got a garbage pump, actually I've got 2 generators, what's that, 6 or 7 now, tractor 8, side-by-side is 9, I've got a chipper. I mean, it starts getting a bit crazy, all the different engines that you own and all the different devices you have to change the oil on, but that's not really what this video is about. Kind of contemplating permaculture and kind of some of the brilliant parts of it. One of the most important things that permaculture kind of got right was this idea of zones, and I think it's underrepresented. I think that people don't emphasize it enough, and so I just wanted to make a little video about that, partially because of the tractor and just kind of thinking about the cost of labor when you're thinking about putting gasoline into a device like a tractor. And I mean, gasoline is basically liquid energy. It's liquid labor, and I think that tractor is 55 or 60 horsepower, tons and tons of torque, so it has a lot of ability to do work. And if I was hiring humans to do that work for me at an equivalent wage to what I would pay for that gasoline, it would literally be fractions of a cent. Now, the reason this is important is I read an article this morning, and I'll try and find it and post it in the show notes below, but the article basically said, like, peak oil is probably going to happen now as a result of this COVID thing. And so with the negative $37 oil and the massive reduction in demand globally, we've seen a whole bunch of supply destruction. So companies are basically massively reducing their capital expenditure in order to preserve dividends. And this is a really big deal in the oil and gas industry. People buy oil and gas stocks because they get dividends, and dividends are basically a payout that you get every quarter or every year, depending on how well the company has done. Now, as a result of reducing the investment, one of the things that has allowed oil and gas companies to grow their reserves is the continual investment. And one of the things that people in the peak oil camp talk about is, well, there's a number of things, but one of them is the importance of continual investment into the exploration for oil and gas reserves. And as they get harder to find, and as we explore more or look for more shale oil, which tends to be fairly easy to find, but the amount of energy that we have to put in order to extract shale oil and gas is quite a bit higher than what we would have had to put in for Saudi oil and gas 100 years ago. The importance of continual investment becomes even more important. So basically, let's just kind of back up a little bit. 100 years ago, when we were extracting the first barrels out of the Saudi Arabian supergiant fields, we were able to get 1,000 to 10,000 barrels, depending on the numbers you read, for every barrel of energy invested into the system. So if you put 1 barrel into exploring for oil, you'd get 10 to 20,000. I mean, again, the numbers are all over the place, but the point is it's really a really great leverage point, and that's because the oil in Saudi Arabia was so plentiful, and and the fields were so large. They're called supergiant fields. As we go into the shale era, and I know there's people on this channel that might argue with this number, but you can look it up on your own. The numbers look to be around 6 units of energy out for every unit in. So if you put a barrel into finding shale oil or shale gas, you get about 6 units out. So it's still fairly good, but it's not 1,000, it's not 10,000, it's not 20,000 units. Now, some people are saying that with the loss of investment, that we could end up being in a supply crunch, which is kind of interesting because we just had this glut, and now we're going to end up with a crunch potentially. It's really hard to know exactly how it's all going to play out. But in terms of how that affects the average person, every calorie of food, and I've mentioned this a ton on my channel. I put a video out there. It's actually just an audio version called The Oil We Eat, and you can look it up on the channel and have a listen to it. But every calorie of food that we grow right now and buy from the grocery store takes between 10 and 20 calories of hydrocarbons to produce it. And so as more of us start realizing, hopefully, that we need to start managing our supply chains, and part of that is growing food, part of that is understanding how we're going to supply our energy, figuring out how to design our properties so that they need the least amount of energy possible is really important. And so while I'm dreaming about getting a new tractor, tonight as I was getting ready to put this old beast away into the shed, I was wondering, what would I have to do to run this property without all these engines, without all this gasoline? What would that look like? And the answer is more of the same, doubling down on these permaculture ideas of getting really tight with my zones. And so this is the garden that we inherited right here. And in a previous video I mentioned that we had designed it along key line, and so very ergonomic beds, 30 inches wide, nice paths to walk on. We're gonna really start experimenting with zero-till gardening at this scale, and I know we're gonna make a ton of mistakes as we go, but we have to try. We're gonna put a garden in right here, which is right behind our garage, and this is one of the hottest zones on our property. We identified that as a microclimate. It was one of the first places to lose the snow. It's south facing. We've got the benefit of the overhang, which shelters it from the cold of space at night. So that's gonna be a corn zone right there. We'll probably end up building a bit of a terrace at some point. We've got our 800 square foot passive solar greenhouse, which is going to be literally just a few steps away from our house. And you'll see that we bucked out part of the foundation to the same level as the floor in this building right here. So this window is going to get turned into a patio door, and then we're going to put a double door in right here, which is going to give us access to our greenhouse right outside our back door, literally. I'm dreaming about putting in a hot tub and a few other things in there as well. And then in front of the greenhouse, where this big pile of dirt is, we're going to end up creating a terrace, which is where our primary gardening is going to go on. You'll notice that we've got trees all around us, so we've got a lot of shelter, a lot of wind shelter. All the trees basically form a sun trap, so we're going to get a really great microclimate in here, which will give us highly productive space. Haven't quite figured out where our forest garden is going to go, and just trying to figure out where our livestock are going to go, and I'm contemplating putting our corrals kind of at the end of the garden there so that the animals can have access to the garden when we need them to do some labor for us. Right now we're currently growing in a greenhouse on the other side of the property, and so you start adding up all the steps every day and you start realizing that having a greenhouse this far away, even though it seems pretty close, let's see it in the background there, the house over there has a greenhouse attached to the front of it. It starts making a big difference. Every step counts when you're trying to design fossil fuel out of your life. And keep in mind, the reason that I'm trying to design fossil fuel out of my life is so that when it's no longer available, I've built systems that allow me to thrive without labor that costs a fraction of a cent. And so it's really hard to make predictions about if we're gonna have a major supply disruption from a fossil fuel perspective, but this really comes back down to those concepts of fragility. And if your system is dependent on a resource that is potentially fragile, then that fragilizes you. And so you need to really think carefully about that and what would happen in the event that it stopped showing up. And as you're kind of at home thinking about this whole COVID thing and figuring out what it means to start securing your own supply chains, I encourage you, I invite you to think about all the ways that energy enters into your life. Where does your power come from? Where does your gasoline come from? Where does your diesel come from? Where does your natural gas come from? What would happen, and you don't have to try and understand what it would be, what would have to happen for it to stop working, but what would happen if it did stop working? How would that affect you? How would you heat your home? How would you eat? How would you get to work if work was even still a thing? How would you manage your garden? And all of a sudden, things start getting really real. And so maybe one of these days we'll try and just shut the power off and stop using gasoline for a couple of weeks and just see what happens out here. The good news is that we haven't really been relying too heavily, other than, like I said, some tractors and some of the other equipment. But really, when I look at how some farms operate, our reliance on gasoline has been pretty low thus far. I mean, I'm even a little bit reluctant about cutting this lawn. Like, the grass is getting pretty long, and the only reason I want to cut it is because the mosquitoes are pretty intense. But I'm kind of wondering, like, what would happen if all this grass was just forage for an animal? You know, like, why am I using gasoline to cut this grass? What social constraints have I set myself up to require kind of short grass? So I'm not sure what I'm going to do about that yet, whether I'm going to sell those lawnmowers or what, but definitely going through my mind. Right here, we're going to be working with Simple Solar. We're putting in a 5.5 or 6 kilowatt solar array. So that should meet most of our electricity requirements on an annual basis. And I anticipate that we're probably going to want a slightly bigger array as things go on, just as we add, you know, maybe an electric car down the road or an electric tractor if we go that route, as the kids get a little bit older. But I certainly also recognize that instead of adding more solar, it might actually be cheaper just to upgrade some of our appliances or reduce some of the things that require electricity. There's always kind of two ways to skin a cat, so to speak. So I'll try and find that article. These types of disasters, I'm specifically speaking about COVID, can end up unleashing other types of disasters. And I think it's important that you're thinking about it. I think at the very least it's important that I'm thinking about it, which is why I'm making this video, so that you don't get caught off guard. And like I said, it's impossible to predict what will happen. But I don't think it's naive to imagine that other things won't happen with the financial system, with the food system, with the energy system. And yeah, hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. I'll keep making videos about it, and feel free to leave any comments in the comment section below. And if there's a specific topic or video you want us to cover, send us an email or leave a comment. Okay, folks, hope you're having a great evening or morning or whenever this video gets released, and we'll see you guys in a future video. Talk soon.